Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
I'm now joined by a resident economist, Marc Coleman. Marc, the Irish Fiscal Advisory Council has advised the government this week not to repeat past mistakes, as it argued that a large budgetary package is not needed this year. The Taoiseach has responded by saying that he feels it needs to be done, but what are your thoughts on this?
Thanks, Karl. It's a great question, as always. Look, I'm afraid that my first observation on the Fiscal Advisory Council is that it's simply not fit for purpose. It's composed of a macroeconomist from the University of Oxford, an economist from the United Nations, an economist from the IMF, and an economist from the Economic and Social Research Institute, none of whom have any practical experience of working in the real world or the private sector. So automatically, we know this is a body which has failed significantly to tackle cost overruns in the health sector. It's failed to address specific issues of why we are spending a third more on public sector pay than private sector pay. No well-run economy has that feature. Instead, what it's targeting is the 5% spending increase that the government set, and it's saying that the government shouldn't exceed that. Well, first of all, in the real world, if your inflation is running at 6 or 7%, and partly that's due to the failure of government to reverse austerity mortgage relief reductions, which happened over 12 years ago. If your inflation is running at that level, you simply have to increase spending in order to maintain services. And Leo Varadkar has made that point very eloquently, and I think I agree with him. What the questions IFEC should really be asking is, why are we spending a third more on public sector pay on average than any other well-run economy in the EU would be doing? Because if we tackle those issues, we would actually be able to provide a lot more public services for the amount of money that we're spending. Unfortunately, the Fiscal Advisory Council haven't done enough on that reform aspect, so a lot of the spending is being wasted, but instead of that, they're tackling a percentage increase on a year-to-year basis. That's addressing a short-term issue. They should be dealing with the long-term problems in our fiscal management or mismanagement. Another issue they should be dealing with is the mismatch between spending. I think they're trying to do it, but they're doing it in a very cack-handed way, between the reliability and the permanence of spending increases, and on the other hand, the fact that the revenue situation is inflated partly by corporation tax receipts. They are right about that, but they're completely wrong to say this is repeating the mistakes of the past. What they don't seem to understand is that the crisis of 2008 to 2013 was caused by a flood of 200 billion euro of credit going into the economy because the financial services sector wasn't being properly policed by the central bank. It's a totally different problem to the one we have now, which is the embarrassment of riches from the corporation tax sector. It's a different problem. It requires different analysis.
Marc, this week as well saw Danny McCoy, the chief executive of IBEC, arguing that we need a bigger state, and to do that we need to pay more taxes to have the society that we require. What are your thoughts on this?
Very well put, Karl. Well, he's a great asset to Irish public policy making and somebody that we're very fortunate to have. He's been absolutely spot on, and I completely support him. When it comes to public infrastructure, like myself, he's one of the people who has very strongly argued that we need to be investing more in houses and roads and rail and hospitals. And we haven't done enough of that. On the capital spending side, he's right. Where I'm afraid I really have to call for a debate is in relation to the current public spending side. We've seen what's happening with public spending in RTE, the HSE, the National Children's Hospital, although that's a capital example. I've referred to the fact that our average public sector pay levels are higher than the private sector by a factor of 36%. We know that qualifications don't really justify that anymore because it's about performance. It's not how many PhDs you have, it's how good a job you're doing. So, what the private sector, and I would imagine a lot of IBEX members are asking now is, well, why should I pay more taxes for a public sector where the average pay level is higher than the area where I work? Why should I pay more taxes when we've seen how much money has been overspent on the National Children's Hospital? Why should I pay more taxes when the HSE just does not appear to be even remotely able to control its budget or manage its resources adequately and is now spending upwards of 23 or 24 billion euro a year? So again, I think Danny is a supremely competent economist, far better one than I am, I'd say. But I think he does come from that public sector ESRI background or the commission background. I think, again, we have the same problem, maybe echoes of what I was saying in the Fiscal Council. We've policy narratives and commentaries that are being delivered by people with the best intention and the best will in the world. And let me say that all these people are good, decent, public-spirited and well-meaning people, but they just don't understand the real world. They don't live in the real world. They are directly or indirectly funded by our taxes, and IBEC gets a lot of revenue from semi-states and universities. And I'm afraid, Karl, that the rest of us are just finding it increasingly difficult to understand what they're saying, never mind agree with them.
Well, if you've just tuned in, that was our resident economist, Marc Coleman, and Marc will be joining us again on next Saturday's programme. We're almost at closing time here now at Business Matters, but before we go, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank my production team, my guests for their contribution, and especially you as always for listening. Join me again next Saturday morning when we'll have more from the world of business, but until then, have a great week.
Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.